Thank you very much, Brendan, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. I studied philosophy and Sockenpol here, graduating in '94, and have great affection for Galway all the while. Came back and worked for Eamon O'Shea and Michael Keane, doing a study of social care needs of the Gaeltacht areas, and my career since then has very much been in education. And just last year, I kind of returned to health. I actually didn't fully regard the social care study as health, but now with the broader concept of health that I've acquired, I believe I do now. So I've 1 year in the post, and I'm head of R&D in health analytics. It brings together, as Brendan says, the investment in ICT, the research services, the stats and analytics, and then the enterprise engagement, academic engagement, and international engagement within the Department of Health. And I suppose it reflects the Department of Health's rejuvenation of our commitment to evidence-based policy and practice. And I think in different areas of life, and Irish life in particular, I think we're wonderful at absorbing buzzwords and the latest jargon without really affecting it or implementing it. And I think evidence-based policy is one of those that I think is very much in wide use. But I think there's an awful long way to go, and I think it's part of my key responsibilities now to give effect to that commitment to evidence-based policy. As I say, I'm in the role about a year, and I thought I'd take the opportunity in preparing this talk just to reflect, I suppose, my initial impressions of the health information and health research landscape. And in terms of my first impressions, I notice everything in health is presented as exponential. It really is. It's phenomenal. Like aging is, dramatically increasing. Chronic illness, microbial resistance, drug costs, waiting lists, trolley counts, budget overruns. There's a chaotic sense of everything running out of control. And I suppose it's in some certain sectors' interests that we would have that sort of sense of helplessness around this. And there's a real imperative, I think, to get a grip, I think, on some of the, the evidence base underpinning health. Because this kind of presentation of everything is exponential, I think has a kind of a tranquilizing effect. You can see with trolley counts and the accessibility, the major problems with accessibility in the services. I think there's a numbness that creeps in, and there's an acceptance that, we'll have thousands waiting, sure, weren't they always, and a kind of a reference with some high point a year ago that sort of, I think, numbs us to the imperative to act and work through these challenges. This is a quote, and I think this summarizes a lot of my first impressions from Dr. Howard Johnson of the HSE. And I must say, coming from education, I thought education was kind of complicated, but I long for the kind of structured data we get around a leaving cert and a junior cert. Now, looking back, but this summarizes in health, we have lots of data, enormous amounts of data coming at us, but little information and less intelligence. I was on a train coming up here from Dublin this morning, and I got my usual beep, kind of all my metrics, and just to give you a sense of the kind of detail. And this isn't just noise; this is quite useful information. But at 6:30 this morning in Galway University Hospital, we had 38 people awaiting admission on trolleys. This is 57.7% higher than average Thursday 6:30 in the morning times. 25% of those 38 waiting were over 75, and 8 of those over 75-year-olds were there for more than 24 hours. And I noticed actually in the metrics that every kind of government target that's been introduced by probably the last 4 governments is still recorded. So I think 6 hours was a big target at one point, then went to 9 hours, then went to 12 hours. They're all there, nothing gets removed. It's a real serious issue in the local hospital. There's no bed free in ICU. There's no bed free in HDU, and I must say I don't even know some of these what these stand for. There's no bed in CCU, but there's 2 in CT-ICU. I'm sure some people know it. I aren't up to speed with that, but that's a very chronic bottleneck in the local hospital. They're looking ahead on the same dashboard I was looking at. There's 13 probable medical discharges today and 17 probable surgical discharges, which isn't even going to get through those waiting, and there's 189 probably expected to come in that door looking for attention on any typical Thursday. So there's an awful lot of data, and you can amplify that by an awful lot coming in around health. And I think a big, huge challenge for us, I suppose, at the national level, is deciphering signals from all this noise. And I'd go further than that, and I think that I would regard sort of even my responsibilities and the responsibilities of the department and the HSE now, and all people in health and social care, is not just deciphering signal from the noise, but actually trying to organise, get a grip on how the noise is actually organised and designed to deliver a better signal that corresponds with what it is we value. So in sort of trying to reflect on how on earth it was really daunting, my early couple of weeks and months in health, and I just trying to struggle with how on earth we would make sense of that kind of the data that's in health. And one thing I kind of noticed is that nearly all the data is generated from service delivery. So it's the trolley numbers, it's the numbers waiting for this, it's the number of procedures done, it's the number of people seen. And very little of it sort of relates to the people of Ireland. And when I went and looked for sort of, I suppose what I was doing is, in progressing health analytics, I had the simple sort of sense that we needed an analytical framework. And the obvious analytical framework, I suppose, is the health and well-being of people in Ireland. It's the mission of the Department of Health to improve the health and well-being of people in Ireland. And it's nice sometimes to bring things up to a kind of high altitude like that and to reflect on that being maybe the analytical framework against which we need to anchor all this noise and all this information that we have. So I suppose, in a sense, what I've been trying to do lately and how I frame the challenge is I want to understand the service delivery and all the services provided in relation to how they affect and impact and improve the health and well-being of people in Ireland. So this is the focus, and it's not just, it's not, like I say, the combination of functions that the department has brought together now. It's not about just generating reports. It's actually about investing in the technology that will support decision-making, at the point of care among health and social care professionals. And I suppose the really dynamic and challenging nature of health is captured just, I suppose, in the complexity of each one of us, as human beings. And that really is the focus. And that's not very discernible from all the noise and metrics. Like, we've crazy stuff going on. The trolley counts. I'll get two more. Probably my phone will beep in a minute with the 12 o'clock stats. It'll beep on the way home with the 6 o'clock stats. I don't pay too much attention to it. It's not my role. That's not the altitude I'm working at. But you don't see in all that busyness around service provision the impact and the focus on the health and well-being of people. And it's something that we need to maybe work towards. The imperative, I have this lovely picture of a kind of curled up hedgehog there. And that's kind of become for me a symbolic of the health information landscape and the health research community in Ireland. And I think Graham is likely to pick up on this because it came through in their survey of the health research landscape. There really is a lot of caution and an increasing awareness of all we believe we cannot do with health information and with health research. And I think sort of in the absence of more sort of positive and proactive sort of guidance, which we're keen to progress, it's dictated by data protection concerns and this sort of, like I say, intense awareness or consciousness of all we believe we cannot do. In terms of health information in Ireland, I think it's come up earlier. I really enjoyed the sessions earlier. And this issue of fragmentation is a huge challenge. The dispersal of data sets. HICWA, 3 years ago, I think it is, went counting the various data sets that underpin sort of health policy and practice in Ireland. They lost count at about 105. None of them have a kind of a common governance arrangement. They all have their own classifications, their standards. There must be enormous duplication in data collection. And there's very limited value actually deriving from them. And not just the data sets themselves which are dispersed, but actually the people with the skill sets to understand data are dispersed from one another in a way that undermines the kind of possibilities and the potential we have as a country. And my sense is that even in these difficult sort of economic times, that if we kind of, and we're probably going to look at this, examine the totality of resource and investment that's going into the various data sets, and to understand, in this sort of brave new world of sort of cybersecurity and data protection, how we can maybe consolidate that information into a common governance arrangement. In health, you'd be very aware the importance of building trust. Health information is extremely sensitive information, so much so that when policy was being developed around health information a few years ago, there was a decision taken to use an individual health identifier distinct for the health sector rather than the PPSN. And I was fascinated with Aisling's excellent slide earlier and the point she made about the variety of different numbers that get assigned and the incoherence of all that and the inability to connect things. So the individual health identifier, the legislation came through in 2014. It's taken us a long time and a lot of work over recent months. But just today, the Secretary General of my department, Jim Breslin, the Secretary General of the Department of Social Protection, and the head of the HSE, Tony O'Brien, are all signing a memorandum of agreement that will allow us to establish the base register underpinning the individual health identifier. And in 2017, or from immediately, we'll be rolling this out. It'll be basically the bank account number underpinning our health and social care system. And it's a key building block in developing the more connected, coherent health system that we all need. In fact, data isn't just a sort of an extra. That connectedness around information is totally critical as an enabler of the kind of emerging model of care. And actually, one thing, for all the chaos in health, there seems to be enormous consensus here and internationally about what is a preferred model of care and how unsustainable the hospital-centric model that many developed countries run is. A sort of a much more reliance on primary care, devolution down to the closest to the home and the community as possible, an emphasis on prevention, and I think we had very good articulation of these kind of preferred models in earlier presentations. So I suppose back to the hedgehog, what the hedgehog needs, I suppose, to hear is a greater intentionality around health information and health research. And in fact, this is an important part of data protection, because one of the main breaches of data protection is that you're doing things with data that you didn't really intend to do at the outset. So I think we need to sort of design in have a lot more rigor about the intentionality. And I love the definition of the word intentional. An action performed with awareness, done deliberately, consciously, on purpose. And somehow, maybe it's growing up or something, we're all taught, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't do it on purpose. We actually have to start doing more and more things on purpose, intentionally, consciously, and I think, there's an awful lot we can do, and I'm praying that we are at rock bottom in relation to, health information and even health service ability to understand information, even though I think the service metrics have disimproved quite starkly since I joined a year ago. But we really need to get a grip on how evidence can be used to better understand, and how the health information can be arranged in intentional ways to do that. In the UK, they're introducing, and they have it in place, a duty to share. So it's not a sort of a data protection sort of restrictions. It's a duty to share information. And one of the things that really that I find quite daunting is the complexity of the Irish health system. It's very like education in many ways, in that the state, frankly, refused to recognise its responsibilities to engage with the provision of health services, like it did in education largely, and left it to voluntary religious orders in most places. And I suppose really the more I look at, the more I understand and learn, and I'm still very much learning, but the state seems to have just kind of superimposed a public system on top of a voluntary and private system in a very Irish way without ever upsetting anybody, ever. And that really explains a lot of the complexity. And even, say, for me, when I look to international examples, and they think they have challenges, in countries where every GP is an employee of the health service, like the hospital consultants are, they might even rotate in and out. They have much more connected things. But in data protection world, every GP here is pretty much a private legal entity in his own right. Pharmacies, largely the same. And any kind of transfer of data, if we were to go from the service providers towards the brighter future, would take millions of memoranda of understanding. And this is a really difficult conundrum. And I suppose my instinct, and we have to flesh this out and consult on the basis of this, my instinct would be to go directly to frame legislation about the rights of all of us as citizens to have our data connected in meaningful ways, to create, say, a national summary care record that would be available on a restricted basis to all health and social care professionals. And then a duty for all health and social care professionals to contribute to our national summary care record in respect of any services that they provide. And that might get us where we want to go, simpler. But this is intentionality. We need to plan around a more desirable future. Graham will pick this point up, and I won't say much, but there needs a national approach. The complexity, in terms of the legalities of data protection, the technology of cybersecurity, and all this requires us to maybe consolidate the key assets, the data sets, but crucially, the even more crucial assets, the skill sets that we have. And I must say, huge compliments to NUI Galway for the kind of courses and its kind of applied focus that you've brought to bear, and the involvement of disciplines way beyond the medical school in health challenges, I think, is really, really impressive. So data is as an enabler of health service improvement. And I actually have to qualify this, that I was using this slide to sort of show the connections, between the various, parts of a system that I would consider desirable, maybe a hub in the middle and some things that maybe aren't connected for safety purposes. But I was showing this slide to some statisticians from the CSO, and they said, "Oh yeah, great idea. Well, that's your chip, is it? That's going to clock where everyone is at any particular." So please don't overinterpret that. But data is a key enabler of health service improvement, and as I say, critical as a basis for implementing the model of connected care. It's critical in understanding advances in medical science. I mean, the amount of effort and resource that we invest in, creating samples reflective of populations and all that, and there's so much sort of health, evidence available if we could just organise it. And like I say, today is a significant day with that MOA signed between the various departments to underpin the individual health identifier, and hopefully in the years to come we'll be able to leverage that for these kind of. And ultimately, the advances in medical science, the advances in health services improvement will contribute to that sort of improved population health and well-being. So, yeah, back to the grid and the national statistical infrastructure. I suppose even the census itself, we did it back in April, and I was just, I'm kind of a statistician by trade from the education side, but I love the census. I love the fact that the last two censuses has had the self-reported health question in it, and it has a question on self-reported sort of disabilities. Now there's two questions, but they're situated in a form that gives absolutely anything else. All these critical variables that John was talking about, the educational status, the home, the commute to work, the family size, the family type, the age, everything. And in fact, an enormous amount of our planning for health and the alignment that we try to achieve, that we talk about between health and social care services and population needs, can be derived without any individualized data, but with actually population level data. And I think the Health Atlas is a very good example of this. There, if you look up Health Atlas on the website, you'll get some just simple profiles on the age dependency ratios, the deprivation indices. And I suppose what I'm conscious of is that health, again, a little bit like the individual health identifier, it seems to have drifted off into its own trajectory. And I'm going to try to lean it back into the national statistical infrastructure, because the Central Statistics Office and the National Statistics Board are actually doing very significant things to shore up the kind of core of public data. And you hear, health in all policies is a mantra, and that's a really important one, because so we kind of have a real keener and keener awareness of, I suppose, the impact of environmental factors and socio-economic factors on health. So a lot of it's here, and we need to make sure that health leans in and leverages into and participates in and benefits from that broader national statistical infrastructure. This is a kind of a place for hedgehogs to cross the road safely. Again, Graham will talk about the DASL model and the data-enabled environment, but there's a lovely sort of schema envisaged there, where all this data that's collected from service delivery and shared among professionals with the individual health identifier can be very valuable if maybe de-anonymized to some extent, and then maybe through a proper governance arrangement made available to support really high-class, large-scale research. And then actually, insofar as it's possible, to support the open data developments, to release as much data as possible. So we need to create those kind of safe spaces for hedgehogs to cross the road and make those key connections and leverage the value from the data, while absolutely respecting the privacy and the security of all that data. Cool. That is almost the end, but when I was on the train coming up, I noticed there's a 2016 centenary event, I think, on here, and I thought I'd add in a little end note and indulge myself in I'm a big fan of history, and I wanted to reflect on the topic of frontiers. I think it's an excellent title for this series of conferences. And I suppose this is contradictory term, the history of our future. In education, my favorite report is this Investment in Education report. It's attributed to the OECD often, actually, but it was done mostly by Irish people under OECD guidance, published in 1965. It was the report that underpinned the decision to make secondary education universal. Don O'Malley's decision in '67 was absolutely underpinned by this report. And the report, I suppose, was like a report on future skills needs in the context of Sean Lamass's sort of programs of economic development. But in the last chapter, and there's hundreds of pages in the main report, and a year later, they published a 700-page annex, which just every nerd's dream. It was just phenomenal. It was absolutely amazing piece of statistics. And in fact, over the course of the 3 or 4 years that they were working, they sort of burst through the vacuum that was sort of education policy information and created a real base on which to sort of, they identified all the main challenges. But in the end, they said of the education and relevance and all that there's no finality about this, nor could there be, for change is perennial, and will not stop this year or next. And I think that frontier concept is good. So then when the centenary, I wanted to just go back 100 years ago. Well, not quite, actually. This is some of Michael Collins, what turned out to be some of his last writings, actually, probably early 20s then. But he was reflecting on, that kind of openness to re-adaptation that's needed, to manage the frontier. And he said this: true devotion lies not in melodramatic defiance or self-sacrifice, but in steady, earnest effort. And I kind of like that. Like, it's not dramatic or anything, but it's really, in terms of statistics and good evidence and good research, I think it is that sort of steady, earnest effort. And this is, again, the intentionality that we need to bring, the meticulousness that we need to bring to our work in terms of shoring up the evidence base underpinning health policy and practice. And then just jumping to approximately 50 years ago, and Lemass himself, this is actually, I blanked out the word education there, but because I wanted to just capture how universal this is. But Ireland, he says, must begin in earnest to address the challenge to frame a development programme and to set the, health targets which must be realised if our facilities are to be kept in proper relation to our requirements as a progressive national community. And I suppose in today's sort of jargonistic world, there's something comforting about the simplicity of that kind of language. And again, that progressive national community. And I think our approach to health needs to intentionally pursue that. And I think a focus on population health to anchor all this noise around service delivery metrics, which are absolutely critical, but which have little meaning independent of the health and well-being of people in Ireland. So, Gurmila Mahaguf, thanks for your time.